On now with the summons.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members, and apologies for the short delay. To all members of the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee, you're hereby summoned to attend the monthly meeting of the committee, which will be a hybrid meeting conducted remotely via WebEx and physically here in the Council Chamber, Tuesday the 4th November at 4:12 p.m. Alderman Cook. Alderman Hussey.
Aye.
Alderman Wilkinson.
Online.
Councillor Sandra Duffy. Councillor Farrell. Councillor Harkin. Councillor Hart.
Apologies.
Councillor Jackson.
Sure.
Councillor Leonard.
Sure.
Councillor McDade. Councillor McGinley.
Sure.
Councillor Mooney. Councillor Tierney. And Councillor Nealis.
Michelle.
Thank you, members. Over to you, Chair.
John. Okay, I'd just like to read out the broadcast statement. I'd like to remind everyone physically present at this meeting or in attendance remotely that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with our protocol. Due to your attendance at this meeting, you are consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility to highlight a request to speak. A copy of the Council privacy notice may be found on the Council website. Okay, so now we just have any declarations of members' interests. No, okay. Okay, moving on. Boilam Fulcha, Akar Rev, and Olu John Doyle, Olskol Chahar Balya Haklia. John is here today. You're very welcome. And he is going to give us give members an update, on the public finances of United Ireland following a committee reference C274/25 on Lahani Tree Gaji Ajay, pages 3 to 10. You're very welcome, John, and we had a discussion before and 10 to 15 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll host a series of questions afterwards. So, Lanara, go ahead.
Good to hear. Look, members, thank you very much for the offer to present here today and for the invitation to attend. I'm very grateful for that. So I'm going to focus on, I suppose, two key questions around the public finances of United Ireland. Is one, what the starting point would be and what the first decade might look like. This research comes out of a joint project with Ulster University, looking at all aspects of the island economy, from short-term issues like tourism and regional development to the medium term around data collection and the longer-term constitutional debate. So we're trying to cover the range from the here and now to the what if. Of course, neither university is responsible for what its academics get up to, so the analysis is purely my own. I want to finish off. All of the work we do is published freely on the internet. It's open access for anyone to read, and obviously there's a lot more detail, and the source material for everything I claim here are primarily drawn on UK government statistics. Made that choice so you couldn't be accused of cooking the books in terms of the figures you started from, and so they're all there to see at the end. Just next slide. So see, those two big sort of questions, and here's the starting point of the UK subvention. And I suppose to start with, I made a point of why are we looking at this? Why did we as academics look at it? And I suppose to some extent, why are you interested? And our assumption as academics is not that if you can prove a certain economic point, then people would change their constitutional point of view, because that's self-evidently not true. The vast majority of people, lots of other issues will be factored in as to how to make up their minds on a future constitutional debate. Doug Beattie, speaking in Dublin about a year ago, said he wasn't an economic unionist, so it didn't matter if oil was struck on the far side of the border. It would be unlikely to change his point of view. And that's probably true for nationalists on the other side of the view. We're also inclined to look at the evidence that suits ourselves. I think all of us as human beings do that. And so we know from survey evidence that nationalists are more optimistic about the economic prospects and unionists are more pessimistic about economic prospects. And so it's not a question of people denying the reality. People just focus on what they believe to be true. But we also know from survey evidence that up to 27% of the population in Northern Ireland say they don't know how to vote in a border poll. And that's fairly consistent, a really high, almost an unbelievably high percentage, given you would think people would have a view on the continental future. So obviously a lot of those people are, I'm not telling you, rather than I don't know. But nonetheless, there are people there who I think part of what would make up their mind will be issues like the economics. And even those who have a firm point of view, you want to make sure in your own mind that you're not a fool and that therefore there's some basis for your instincts and what's going on. I suppose that's the reason why we focused on this issue. And with the public debate, people talk about a figure of 10 to 20 sort of billion sterling, depending on what you pick at. The last audited UK government accounts showed that the fiscal deficit in Northern Ireland, the difference between taxation raised in Northern Ireland and what's spent in and on behalf of, and the second part of that is very crucial, the gap between income and expenditure is 14 billion. That's the last figure we have that's been fully signed off by the Office for National Statistics in the UK. It's a normal accounting exercise. The Republic of Ireland also would look at sort of sharing the costs of central offices around the regions to see what the costs and income would be. But it's not the same as what if, because that's not what the ONS have been asked to do in the context of the UK. They were not asked to calculate the fiscal deficit on day one of United Ireland. They were asked to take the cost of running the UK and divide it across the nations and regions of the UK. That's what they were asked to do. And things by and large are shared on a per capita basis. They could have done it on an economic sort of ability to pay basis, but it's done on a per capita basis. That makes a big difference. Of that 14 billion figure, that gap between income and expenditure, there's 100 different items in there, but there's 4 key ones that I think make up the vast majority of that gap and probably are the ones that have been in the public debate the longest. Of that gap, 5.7 billion per year is the cost of public pensions. That's both state pensions for those with national insurance contribution, pension credit for those without contributions, but a very large chunk of it is public sector employment pensions, people who have paid in for a pension for 40 years or thereabouts and in retirement claim a pension. But the UK, like the Republic of Ireland and many countries, don't put that money away in a pension fund. People have a very strong sense of, I have an entitlement to a pension. And we sort of have an image that somebody took our contributions every year and invested them in the stock market or something, and they're sitting there ready for us. But they're not. They're treated like taxation. That's done north and south. And in some ways, it's future taxpayers pay for our pensions. So my claim is not that there's a legal commitment on the UK government to pay these pensions in the future, rather that there's an expectation, and it would be highly controversial to turn that expectation on its head. And that's why I think there's, at very least, it's not that I'm saying there's a legally binding commitment that can't be wriggled out of. The Irish government could abolish all old age pensions in the morning. The question is, would they? And you see the chaos in Westminster when the UK government tried to cut back on disability benefits. You could imagine the chaos if they just said, well, actually, we're no longer going to pay pensions to police officers and nurses and military pensions and civil servants and local government. No, local government, you have your own pension fund. You're safe. But those people, I think it's the political chaos that would bring. And what would happen? That if you moved to Buncrana, would you get your pension? Because at the moment, lots of us have worked between Ireland and UK over working lives, and the two systems have a really well worked out system. They work it to your advantage, by and large. My wife's a Scouser, so she worked part of her life in England, part of her life in Ireland. And when they're working out her pension, they just worked it out to her advantage. They moved a couple of years from one jurisdiction to the other. And I mean, obviously, there's a public debate around English people who've retired into the south of Spain. Their pension arrives in their... If the British government, as they legally could do, said, we're not paying any of that pension, it's up to United Ireland to pay it, well, would they pay it if you moved to Spain? Would they pay it if you moved to Dublin? So would a Republican moving from Derry to Letterkenny get their pension, but a military officer who stayed in Lisburn would not? These are questions that would be not legally binding, but politically very, very controversial and administratively very complicated to work that out. So my expectation and our expectation is that as they did during the EU-UK withdrawal agreement, where they agreed to pay pro rata, as they do between Ireland and the UK at the moment, and as EU member states do right across the continent, it's paid pro rata based on the number of years you paid taxes and employment pension contributions in each of the countries. And our expectation is that that would be done, not because it's legal, but because that's what political pressure will be likely to dictate. Debt, on the other hand, if pensions is the plus and minus at the end of my presentation, because the UK government could turn up and say, not a penny in whatever number of years' time. But debt is in a totally different situation. There's no contractual law, no national law, and no international law that requires a future Irish government to pay a penny of the UK Treasury sovereign debt. And there's no basis for that whatsoever. I'm not saying it couldn't be done. The civil servants might turn up and say, well, if you pay the debt, we'll pay the pensions because you can borrow cheaper than we can, as Ireland can borrow cheaper than the UK at the moment. So I'm not saying it wouldn't be put on the table, I'm not saying the UK wouldn't turn up wanting everything, because that's what negotiators do. But in terms of the outcome of those negotiations, if they go badly, then why would the future Irish government agree to pay a penny of debt that they don't owe a penny of if they just got burned on pensions during those negotiations? So it's impossible to be caught for those, because worst case scenario, you walk out and you don't pay a penny of it, because you're legally not required to pay a penny of it. There's been obviously a very public debate about Ireland's level of defence spending over the last sort of year or two, particularly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And defence spending will probably increase by somewhere between 50 and 100% over the next 3 to 4 years. But nobody's expecting a referendum on United Ireland in a 3 to 5 year timescale, or at least very few people are expecting it in that timescale. So I think that debate and that increase will have come to some sort of conclusion before that. Ireland, to put it in the context, Northern Ireland's share of UK defence expenditure is 1.6 billion sterling. Ireland's entire defence expenditure crossed the €1 billion threshold last year for the first time. I think if a United Ireland was happening today, and that's the basis of these figures, if it was happening today, it's hard to think of a conclusion to a debate in Dublin that says, let's go from 1 billion to 3 billion sterling in any sort of short time frame. That's not likely, because in that 1.6 billion is Northern Ireland's share of the nuclear weapons programme, Northern Ireland's share of UK forces stationed abroad. Only a tiny, tiny proportion of that is paid to military personnel in Northern Ireland. So it's primarily something that happens entirely out of the Northern Ireland context. There will be some increase. We've assumed an increase of about 200 million in the figures we use, just because there will be some increase. There's a larger area, there's a larger water area in particular. Some members of the British, we're assuming that members of the British Armed Forces would be given the right to stay in the British Armed Forces or to move at the same rank and conditions to the Irish Defence Forces. But for all sorts of reasons of scale and heritage, perhaps not many that would move, but you need to allow for that possibility. So we've knocked 1.4 out of that 1.6 billion. And the final figure on tax and adjustments, because taxes primarily are not collected by region. Tesco's, for example, pay their corporation tax, their capital gains tax, their VAT bill in London. They don't calculate in a way that could calculate how much VAT is owed, how much corporation tax is owed, how much capital. So they do it based on number of employees per region. And given most major organisations have their head offices and their back office functions in the London area, London benefits from those corporation and capital gains tax to a huge amount. And most people estimate Northern Ireland is short about 500 million because of the way that's calculated. And it would cost too much to calculate it on a store-by-store basis, so you're never going to persuade companies to do that. The other one where there is an opportunity to do it differently is Northern Ireland pays a per capita cost of all central UK offices, as you'd expect. So the cost of Whitehall, the cost of the Office of National Statistics itself is just divided. Northern Ireland pays little less than 3% of the overall cost of that. And that's just shared equally across the region. But very few of those organisations are based in Northern Ireland. And the taxes paid by those employees, which are typical state agencies, about 66% of their operating budget, are credited to the place where those employees or workers are based. They're not spread pro rata around the state. So between things that wouldn't exist at all, like the House of Lords, but more particularly the impact of spreading the cost equally, but leaving the income where the people work, drives income taxes to the southeast of England and the London region. And collectively, those add almost 2 billion to subvention. Just the way they calculate those costs and spread them around is a figure. Even if every one of those state agencies was exactly replicated in United Ireland, obviously people then would pay their taxes to the government of United Ireland or a devolved administration if it was a devolved matter, but it wouldn't leave the island of Ireland. So even if the cost was identical, the income taxes would all stay within. Whereas in the current ONS model for the UK, those income taxes are spread to wherever those workers are based, which is almost never Northern Ireland. So if you rule out pensions and debt, you assume defence, there's an extra increase of about 200 million, and you allow for those adjustments in taxes, and there's a few other minor issues to go together. The day one cost of United Ireland is 1.5 billion. That's the cost that is, there is a real gap between income and expenditure because of needs-based expenditure in Northern Ireland. It's not like they're the highest level of public services going around. So that's our starting point, is 1.5 billion. But it's not really the starting point because there's the needs on top of that. Just have the next slide. So if we're starting off with that subvention that would transfer over 1.5 billion sterling, which is about 1.25 billion euros on today's exchange rates. However, something is that you would need to boost public expenditure in Northern Ireland by 1 billion euros per year, every year, plus inflation allowances for 10 years. That would be the minimum just to deal with the crisis in health, crisis in levels of education, infrastructure needs. It's hard to see how you could make any headway for a figure less than that. And that would be held regardless of what the economy was doing over 10 years. So we just added, so we started off with 1.25 euros, we've added 1 billion. It's a round figure. I'm not saying it wouldn't be 2 billion or 1.5 billion, but it's not going to be a small amount of money, that's for sure. Then there are two other factors that have to be budgeted for from year one forward. There's a 48% difference in average public sector wages between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. While that could be a devolved matter, and you could leave doctors in Derry on different wages to doctors in Donegal, I think in a small place that's highly unlikely to be politically sustainable into the long run. It's not going to happen on day one. I don't think anyone would believe you in a referendum if you're promising them a 48% pay rise the following year. Like, people just wouldn't believe you. Also, it would be impossible for the private sector to adjust to that. If wage levels in the public sector suddenly go up by almost 50%, how are people supposed to compete for labour in those contexts without time to adjust? And while there is about a 12% difference in the cost of living between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's not a 48% difference, and it's not going to happen overnight. I think any Irish government that wanted to win a referendum would promise a pay rise on day one, but they'd also have things they want to talk to trade unions about. There's differences in terms and conditions, there's difference in the length of the working year, there's some difference in pensions. Any government that wanted to talk about those things is going to say, well, listen, we're not saying we won't pay this, it will be paid, but we want to talk about how long a time that will take, and we want to put these other things on the table for part of those negotiations as well. That's, I think, a much more likely outcome than here's 48% pay rise tomorrow. I think no one would believe that to be the case. Germany took 30 years to equalise wages and pensions between the two parts of Germany. I think politically, I don't think you could sell that on somewhere as small as Ireland. So we just split it. We're not suggesting 15 years. We just took half the German experience and said the wages would be equalised over 15 years. So people would get their normal cost of living increase plus 3% every year for 15 years. The wages were equalised. The likelihood is you'd do some of that up front because you'd promise something in a year one context. There would be some increases in cost of living that would be immediate, and you'd want that year one increase to be large enough plus a bit. But if you just spread it evenly over the 15 years, because from the point of view of working out what a 10-year experience, it doesn't really matter if that cost is in year two or year one in the greater scheme of things. But it will add 152 million a year after taxes are allowed for to the public sector wage bill of the current workforce in Northern Ireland every year. It will go up. So it's 152 in year one, it's 304 in year two, and so on until wages are equalised. So that's a figure that has to be allowed for. It's going to happen at some pace over that. If you do it over 10 years, that's closer to 200 million thereabouts. The other thing that surely will happen, even if there's a deal on pensions as we anticipate, that's very similar to the current Irish-British relations or similar to the EU withdrawal agreement arrangements. The thing about pensions is that the number of people who are paid into United Ireland increases by 1 year every year. Some pensioners die off who get an 100% UK pension, more people retire who have a much bigger share. So if that's evenly spread, it doesn't actually evenly spread because people of different ages are retiring in different time periods. But if you just spread it evenly over the 40 years, a government of United Ireland would need to come up with 115 million extra every year to deal with that cost. And I suspect it probably will be a bit quicker than 40 years, but that would be the cost that's there. So therefore, if you're dealing with the inheritance subvention, you agree to equalise salaries over 15 years, you end up taking over pensions. That's not really for negotiation, and you add 1 billion a year as an estimate for what we're doing, at what you would, as a minimum, that gives you just over 3 billion a year would be the deficit. The difference between income and expenditure in year one is about 3 billion. So next slide. So how do you deal with that cost of 3 billion? That's going up by another 250 million each year, particularly with salaries and pensions every year. I suppose the starting point is there was a figure doing the rounds in the southern media for quite a lot. I know it got a bit of coverage in the north as well. It will cost 20 billion a year for 20 years. I think not only is this not an accurate figure, it's not even a worst case scenario. And some people get into the habit of, well, John Doyle says it's 3 billion and someone else says it's 20 billion. Let's split the difference. That seems a fair thing to do. But if you went to buy a car that was advertised as 10,000 and you were going to offer 9, and the person says, yeah, I know it says 10, but I want 100,000. Should tell you what, let's split the difference and give us 50. Like, that's not what you do if somebody just makes up a ludicrous figure. If you end up paying 9.5, both sides will probably go home happy. If somebody asks you to pay 50,000, you're just not going to think they're saying. So it's not 20 billion. How did you get to 20 billion over 20 years? It assumes the entire subvention carries over to United Ireland. So it assumes that those civil servants, Irish and UK civil servants, meet in a room. The UK say not a penny on pensions, you're not getting it. Like, it's your responsibility. People voted to leave the UK, so it's your bill. And the Irish civil servants go, well, fair enough. I'll tell you what, we'll pay the debt as well. Like, in what world is that what's going to happen in those negotiations? You could get cut for the pensions, we accept that, but you're not going to offer up debt that you don't owe a penny of legally. You might offer it up if you do a deal on pensions, but you can't get cut for both. This 20 billion for 20 years assumes you get cut for both. It assumes a 48% pay rise in day one, so everybody gets a 48% pay rise in the public sector the first day of United Ireland. I think that's not impossible, but I think it's extraordinarily unlikely. What is impossible is they actually forgot to tax it when they were doing their calculations. So everybody got a 48% pay rise tax-free, which those of us who work in the public sector realise that's rarely what encounters you in life. So actually just 2 and a bit billion is just an error in their calculations. They say it costs 4.5 billion to increase pensions and welfare payments. They don't say how they got that figure. What you can do, we know the number of pensions exactly. We know the difference between the two state pensions and pension credit north and south. To equalise that on day one costs 343 million. The recent debate on disability payments, they're actually marginally more generous in the UK system than the Irish system. There's only about a tenner in it, but you know, it's not going to cost anything to equalise them. Unfortunately, the UK government may equalise them down in the meantime, but that's a different argument. So it's just impossible to see. If your starting point is pensions cost 343 million, unemployment levels, thankfully, are very low. Disability payments, which are the second biggest category after pensioners, are almost equal. Where do you get the other 4 billion figure equalising? It looks like they equalised private pensions as well, that they assumed the Irish state would take over people's private pension pots, which I don't think anyone would thank the Irish government for laying their hands on the private pension pot. So it's like, that's not going to happen. The fourth argument is they said that the USSR debt was equally divided between all the former states of the USSR, and therefore that's the precedent. That's just factually not true. Russia inherited the entire USSR debt. Russia obviously proposed that it be shared equally. 7 countries in the midst of chaos said they'd do it, but they never actually paid a ruble. And the other 7 told them where to take a hike. And so Russia, after a couple of years, accepted the entire debt, which is also what happened at the time of partition, where initially the British government, under threat of immediate and terrible war, got the Irish side to say they would take a share of the debt, but it was cancelled in 1925 as part of the Boundary Commission report, because that was just there. And the other thing is they assume that there will be zero growth over 20 years, that the economies where there's a significant economic gap north-south in the moment, that will be identical after 20 years. So with the same IDA selling FDI abroad, the same corporation tax regime, the same level of public sector pensions, the same education system, that would be zero convergence between Northern Ireland. And we're talking about averages here, not just the Dublin region. So Belfast and Derry and the entire North would remain so much poorer than Cork and Kerry after 20 years. Nothing would have altered. And that's just, you know, not only pessimistic assumptions, I think it's almost an unbelievable assumption. So I think the 20 billion for 20 years is simply not believable. Next slide. So what we did is we looked at, well, what, you know, without taking out your crystal ball and just guessing, what is a reasonable assumption about economic convergence that's happening in the future? So we don't know, but what would you give you, well, this is what happened somewhere else in the past. What would be a reasonable way to look at? And we argue that EU membership is actually a reasonable comparison, not least because Northern Ireland will be rejoining the European Union on day one of United Ireland. That's agreed with the EU in advance. There's no need for treaty changes. That was one of the very important things in negotiations during the Brexit negotiations. It doesn't require 27 countries to agree at a national level. It's locked in. So I think that is a relevant comparison. And comparisons with regional policy, city deals, levelling up, they're so small in comparison to the impact of joining the European Union and constitutional change. We think they're not a relevant criteria. The amount of money on the table, as you well know, for those sort of regional deals are so small, they're not going to move an entire region. whereas joining the European Union was a significant national impact. And so we looked at the Central European states from 20 to 2015, so a reasonable period, periods when there was good growth, but also periods when there was a global financial crash. So it was a mix of good and bad years. We thought it was a reasonable comparison. And we compared those countries to West European countries where, at one level, things hadn't changed that much. And the weakest countries, like Hungary, for obvious reasons in terms of the political chaos there in recent years, they still grew 1% a year quicker than Western Europe. The middle range countries and the bigger ones like Poland grew 2% faster than Western Europe. And the fastest growing states, in particular the Baltic states, Slovenia, they grew 3% faster than Western Europe over it. So we took that as that's a range. Nobody grew slower than 1% better than Western Europe, and nobody did a super sort of heroic level of growth. But we thought there's a range of real life that didn't happen that long ago, gives us something to go on. And it's also very similar to what happened in Ireland when we joined the European Economic Community, similar to what happened in Spain, Portugal, Greece, the whole range of countries who joined the European Union from a poorer position saw that level of convergence at about those rates in those times. So there's a historic pattern where that's very similar. Next slide. It's coming to an end now. So if the level of economic growth, taking out the multinational distortions from the South, so we use GNI, gross national income, rather than gross national product, because it just strips out the sort of accounting transactions, which obviously the Irish state benefits from in corporation tax, but not real in terms of jobs. So if it took 25 years for Northern Ireland to look like Cork and Kerry economically in terms of wage levels, so that was the sort of level, not overly dramatic. That would mean average growth in Northern Ireland, which is 1.3% for the last quarter century, since the Good Friday Agreement would move to 4%, and you'd have no deficit after year 5. Now, I think in reality, you'd have more public spending and probably still have the deficit, but you could, if you wanted to, have a balanced budget by year 5. The middle range was probably the most likely one. If convergence took 40 years, it took 40 years for the broad economy wage levels to converge with Cork and Kerry. That we think is not an optimistic outlook. We think it's every likelihood it would take less than 40 years. That would require 3.2% growth. You'd have no subvention after year 6. And convergence took a lot longer, about 60 years before wage levels, GNP per capita reached the level, average levels in the South, which is basically Cork and Kerry. Northern Ireland growth would go up by 1%, and the deficit would still end in year 9 because income is rising, with wages increasing, public sector wages increasing. Income is actually increasing a lot faster than expenditure in those circumstances. So not only is there potential to deal with the inherited deficit without bankrupting the entire island, but there is a medium-term perspective of increasing public services beyond what $1 billion a year would cover at the start. And so those we think are 3 likely outcomes. Next slide. That would go there. So in summary, the sort of fiscal outlook is $3 billion a year is a modest subvention, given the size of the island economy. A different deal on pensions doesn't alter that. So if the UK turned up and said, the only figure there where there's a doubt is pensions, because legally the UK could do what it liked. We just argued they wouldn't. And they've never said they would, and they didn't do it during the withdrawal agreement despite the chaos. And they didn't do it with the Irish government after Brexit. So, but even if they did, that just adds 3 to 4 years to how long it would take to break even. It doesn't fundamentally alter. So you're borrowing an extra $4 billion a year in year 1 because workers are currently paying higher pension contributions. So that deficit lasts somewhere between 5 and 11 years. All of that would also include the convergence of wages and pensions. So the transition costs are about 20 billion in total, not 20 billion a year for that detail. So that could be borrowed. Ireland's currently borrowing that level of money over a decade is very affordable. It could be covered by creating sovereign funds. The Irish government is currently putting a share of their surpluses away. A sovereign fund of 20 to 30 billion, I think, would be politically a better move, because if you're telling people there's a cost going to be borrowed, people intrinsically don't like borrowing. But if a sovereign fund is sitting there to deal with those ones for climate change and pensions at the moment, that would be a very strong argument that this was not a financial risk. But it's about 0.75% of gross national income of the island. Like, it is $3 billion is a lot of money to any normal person, but in terms of an all-island economy, it's a relatively small amount of money. So the Republic collected 120 billion in taxes last year, so they'd have to collect 124 billion. Like, it's not a huge, even if you taxed people, which would obviously be the least popular thing to suggest in a referendum. So borrowing or a sovereign fund are more likely, but none of these are sort of threatening to the overall economy of the island. I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Mila has Ashan. John, Bishanta Samuel is really interesting. It's very welcome. We really welcome this report, and it shows from it that the cost of unity has been overstated. The benefits of the all-island economy are underestimated, and that Irish unification is economically viable. So I'm going to open it up to the floor now. I'll take a couple of questions at a time, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay. I'm going to start off with Councillor Duffy.
Cormagat, Chair. John, thank you very much for the presentation, and I would just like to welcome you on behalf of Sinn Féin. We were really excited to have the opportunity to not only hear from you, but to actually have you in the room and have the opportunity to hear directly from you in relation to the report that has been published and your thoughts behind it, because I think that, you know, there is a lot of information out there. There is a lot of inaccurate information out there, and there's a lot of out-of-date information out there. And as the more and more people are coming to the conversation around Irish unity, what it might look like. And it's really important that we have really good, accurate data and information of what that might look like to involve people in the conversation and inform their decisions. And you're right, there are people who no matter what you say or what any of us say, they have their entrenched own beliefs around it, and we won't shift them. But there is a cohort of people who are up for a conversation and are up for debate. So it's really important. I think that I have scribbled loads of notes while you were talking, because I think that even from having a cursory look through the report before and then your presentation, just even hearing you talk through it has made it clearer in my head in relation to a lot of the information contained in it. I think we often talk of the subvention, and we talk about it in a way that it's so big that we can't overcome that to move the conversation forward. And I think you have clearly demonstrated that that is not the case, and I think that's really important information that the public are aware of, and that we use any opportunity that we can to get that information out. And I know I'm conscious that I have a unionist colleague sitting beside me who may have a different point of view, but I welcome hearing that as well. I think some of the information contained within the report as well, particularly around public sector pay and that 48% pay gap, is huge. And I don't think that people hear that enough or understand that that is an actual factual piece of information. So it's really important to get that out as well. But I mean, the report is really well written. It's there, and I know Owen McGuinness, who had presented before to our Irish Unity working group as well, has been very vocal on this about closing the gap and being able to improve outcomes for people, not only more jobs but better jobs for people right across the island, and the difference that that will make to people's lives on this island. And I think that we have an opportunity to bring more and more people to the conversation, and it's reports like yours and pieces of research that put the actual factual information on the table, because, as I say, a lot of information is very out of date or just factually incorrect. But thank you very much. Really enjoyed the presentation, and hopefully going to enjoy some of the other comments that have been made, and because I think that that informs all of us in terms of where we are and how we can take this discussion forward. Because I think as a council, we have our Irish Unity Working Group, so we are trying what we can. So if you have advice for us on how we can move the conversation forward, or how we can influence governments in terms of taking the conversation forward, I think that's really important too. But thank you very much for attending today in person. It's very much appreciated.
Councillor Duffy. Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to Derry, John, and thanks for coming up. And I thought that your presentation was very, very interesting and very useful, and I think it's very important that we debunk a lot of the arguments, which I would consider scaremongering arguments about getting rid of partition and having a united Ireland. I think that I would vote then petition tomorrow. And I think there's a lot of people, as you pointed out in your presentation, north and south, whose minds are maybe already made up. And but there are a lot of people who will decide based on the information that they're given. So I think that when we seen the referendum for Scottish independence, at a certain point when all the main parties in Britain rallied to defend Britain and to stop independence, they were just making up facts and figures and using the weight of government to terrify people. But despite that, the independence vote got very, very close. And that was very interesting. I think that the vote for Catherine Connolly shows that many people in the south, and I think it's shared in the north, want a different kind of Ireland. I think, you know, you mentioned neutrality. I think people want to defend, a majority of people want to defend neutrality. I think that the election of Catherine Connolly as well means that we're going to have an advocate in the role of the President of Ireland who's advocating for a united Ireland and a different kind of Ireland, which I think is great. So I think that in terms of the debate by researchers, economists, a lot of it I find is static in the sense that people are dealing with estimated figures based on how reality is right now. But I think in a new Ireland, people would be thinking about how to change everything. So a lot of the what is it going to look like in 10 years or 5 years or 20 years, I think is impossible to know. Because again, I think the vote for Catherine Connolly is about saying, look, we don't want an Ireland that is a tax haven for for American corporations to do whatever they want and really suck out from Ireland huge amounts of wealth, or use Ireland to transport huge amounts of wealth into the bank accounts of billionaires in the United States, which is connected to neutrality, obviously. And the one thing I would say in terms of like the calculations, look, in the South right now, the top 10% of the wealthiest 10% hold almost 50% of the wealth in the South, which amounts to around 650 billion euros, which is a lot of money. I would like to see that redistributed. And the redistribution of that wealth would have a massive impact on all these calculations and how to think about them. And that's true for the North. We don't have the top 10, the wealthiest 10% in the North control around 25% of the wealth. So if you're redistributing wealth, it has a big impact on how all this works out for public services, you know, for investment into an All-Ireland rail network that we want to see developed, an All-Ireland health system, an All-Ireland education system. So again, look, I commend your efforts to debunk all the fear-mongering and scaremongering, because I think that's going to be essential. But I also think we have to be talking beyond the way that capitalism functions right now and the way that a tax haven economy works, or you know, the North really functions as in the same way that the British economy, a market-based economy. So I would like to get your points of view on that, which is somewhat beyond the facts and figures as well.
May I get Councillor Harkin? We'll stop there and then we'll come back into yourself, Councillor Farrell, okay?
I'll take them in reverse, if you don't mind, Councillor Duffy. I suppose there's a few things there, Councillor Harkin. I mean, the Scotland case is interesting because one of the, I think, correct critiques of those who are unpersuaded by the debate on Irish unity is that there's no plan from the Irish government. And I think, you know, until there's a plan from the Irish government, what person in their right mind in some ways would want to approach this issue? And before Brexit, perhaps you could have persuaded people to have a vote on the principle, and we'll tell you the detail later. But in the last 2 and 3 years of researching this area, I haven't been in a single room where even a small group of them thought, let's just vote on the principle and we sort the rest out later. So the Brexit is, I think, ended that debate on whether you just have two referenda, one on principle, one on the detail. I think people do not want to have a vote without somebody telling them about education and health and tax and all those issues. So I think there's just no choice about that, and I think it's a pity the Irish government has resisted that preparation. Because you don't only prepare, I think it was actually Peter Robinson was it talked about the insurance notion or managing risk. You prepare for things that might happen, not just things that you wish to happen. And so I think that's, in the case of Scotland, they published 1,000 pages of a government paper, but they still avoided, in reality, the SNP avoided issues around currency, in particular, a few others, but that was probably the one that was the difference, I think, between winning and losing that referendum. And it's a temptation to not deal with the issues that are most challenging to your own position. But the public ultimately, enough of them didn't want to take that chance, and they were nervous, and I think that was probably the difference. And the SNP, I mean, sometimes the comparison is drawn with that, because the SNP did offer to pay for debt and pensions. And debt wasn't going to be transferred to them, but they would agree to send money south each year for the equivalent cost. But they were negotiating for the right to have a referendum. So the SNP were going to Westminster saying, please give us the right to have a referendum. Westminster said, well, yes, if. Whereas the Good Friday Agreement obviously guarantees the right to have a referendum. You don't need to negotiate for it by offering up money in advance. So there's a difference in Scotland in that regard. But that was the main point I was going to make in Scotland is even 1,000 pages wasn't enough if you ignore the issues people really care about. I suspect voters will want to know that somebody thought about agriculture and somebody thought about local government reform, but there's probably not that many people, maybe council chiefs executives, for whom their vote will be on that issue. But people want reassurance that somebody thought about it and there's a plan. But ultimately, it'll be a small number of issues that will determine that. And yes, so I suppose our issue was on this paper was just about what's the starting point cost, assuming it needs more public spending than is there now. But I think, yes, to win a referendum, I think it's pretty clear from all the evidence we have to date that people want a lot of detail on a future health system, a future education system, and obviously they want it better than they're realising. And that's a changing debate, because if we look, education, there's been a gap for a long time, but it's growing really badly. So, I mean, if you take the post-GCSE, post-junior cert in the South age cohort, so, roughly 16 to 19, the latest figures, about 95% of that age cohort are in school in the South. You'd like it to be 100, but 95 is pretty good by European standards. It's 70% in the North, which is one of the worst in Europe. It's a whole group of people who are not being well prepared for a modern knowledge economy, either in traditional trades or in the university or further education system. I mean, that figure, and you'd want a plan to deal with that. And health, I mean, if having this conversation, I suspect even 2 years ago, people would have put the NHS as being a slam dunk argument in favour of continuing the union with the UK, because the assumption of you don't pay, the image of the Southern health system was always a bit of a caricature. It was never an entirely private model, even in its weakest moments. But I was just looking at some of the figures for people waiting longer than a year for an appointment. And they're now 8 times worse per capita in Northern Ireland and the Republic. And after housing, the length of the waiting list is the second most important political issue in the South, because it's almost consensual that the waiting lists are too long. Even the government accepts they're too long. They just have a different opinion as to how you deal with it. So those gaps of issues, but that's not the perception. And it's pretty clear from focus group research we've done North and South that the level of information people have about the other, on the other side of the border, is poor, and it's equally bad North-South and South-North. That people really don't have a good level of knowledge about health. So we need information about the here and now, but also about, well, what's on offer. I think we do need that Scottish 1,000 pages, but it needs to deal with the issues that are tricky for those advocating for United Ireland. If you skip the issues you don't have the strong answers for, the voters won't thank you for it, in my view, come election. That's certainly the evidence we have today. People want a lot of detail on that. And I suppose the final point in terms of in terms of the critique of, so it wasn't the role of this paper or broader project to provide a model of post-capitalism. That wasn't what we're about. But if you're coming from the left yourself, that I know. But obviously, there's no public money. If your starting point is that there's a 15 billion subvention, then how can you credibly say, let's improve the health system, let's improve education, unless you're raising serious amounts of money from unspecified taxes? Whereas if that gap is more manageable, then it's much more, it's easier. I'm not saying it's easy, it's easier to say, here's. But notwithstanding the sort of a very concentrated level of wealth in the South and the disgrace of the housing crisis, it's still on balance a more equal society than Northern Ireland, and certainly more equal than the UK as a whole. A higher proportion of tax is redistributed to the benefit system in particular, and you can see that with basic benefits hitting about €290 a week. I'm not saying that's enough to have a dignified life on, it isn't, but obviously it's far greater than what's available in the UK benefit system and pension credit system. So there is already, so even I would say for someone who's coming out from a left critical perspective, if nothing changed, working class people would be better off the morning after United Ireland. And if something does change, which obviously you'd be advocating for, then they'd be a lot better off. But even if you lost those arguments, and what happened was just for the first year or two, a flip over, people would still have a very significant increase in their standard of living, and the social basis would be there to agitate for a different form of society. So was that how I would navigate that space between my role as an academic and your role as a political operator with a different vision of beyond what's here at the moment. I suppose, Councillor, I suppose in terms of advise the way forward, what's pretty clear is that nobody wants to have a vote without a plan. I think we're not finished doing the research in that by a long way, but I think I'd be shocked if the evidence showed us anything different as we work our way through that research. I think people want a really detailed plan, and they want it every aspect of society. But the flip is also true. They don't want a group of civil servants to get locked into a bunker and turn up with a green paper and go, there you go, because they don't trust that group of civil servants to cover the issues. So we've done a lot of work with women's groups, including some here in the Northwest, people working in community development, and they were very strong that they wanted a chance to shape the agenda, not just a comment on a PDF that's on its way to the printers. So they really wanted in at the start because they felt they would put a different list of things on the table than senior civil servants put on the table. So that does mean you need a bit more time, but I think we need a phased approach. You need, obviously, there's no point having people in a room to discuss something if they don't know what they're there to discuss. So you have to have some shape on that, but there is a sense that people want to be involved in a very early conversation. Then they want someone to pull that together. I would suggest we've argued in our work that should be an Oireachtas committee. While it could be the two governments, the British government is, why should they do this? It's not their future. It's not what they're advocating for. I think it's unreasonable in some ways to expect the British government to be the one to prepare for Irish unity. That onus is clearly on the Irish government. But given it's going to go on for longer than one parliamentary term, it's not going to be done and dusted in 5 years. I think an Oireachtas committee, if you can get at least, you won't get all party agreement on everything because people have different views on health systems, on education, but you can get all party agreement on some things and you get a list of options on the others, then that gets you beyond the next election. And so you can say to people, this is not just the party currently in power saying we do this. The opposition actually have signed up to 3/4 of this, and the opposition are saying they would do this. So I think a parliamentary committee is a better model than a cabinet just issuing what ultimately is out of date the moment the next election is held. That then needs to be drafted and needs to be long, and then that needs to go back out to community groups and trade unions and medical organisations for other people. And that's when you get a different level of public debate then. Because people might think, well, this is a long way into the future. I'm not a political person. I'm not going to turn up to my local community hall. But if you're a doctor or a nurse or a radiographer and suddenly you see a plan for the health system, you're much more likely to turn up to your trade union meeting to say, hang on, I'm not signing up to that. That's not what my vision is. So I think you need that phased approach, but it needs to start off with quite an open agenda so people feel they have a chance to alter the agenda if they don't agree with it. But then it's got to get more specific as you go along, and it's got to end up with something quite specific long before we vote. Because the second the referendum is called, your chance for reflection is over. Then you're in campaigning mode, everybody exaggerates their side and downplays the other. The only way you can have this sort of conversation is because we're not having a vote anytime in the foreseeable future. So therefore people can go, yeah, maybe I wasn't right on that. Maybe I do need to change my perspective. Maybe I need to consider something I didn't consider before. You can only do that well in advance. As Brexit showed, once you call the vote, rationality goes out the window in most referendum, and certainly on something as contentious as a vote on the constitutional future will be.
Okay, next up is Councillor Farrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, John, for a really interesting and timely presentation on behalf of the SLP. Some of the issues I was going to touch on have been previously addressed by other speakers. I think it's good to see it in black and white, and the referendum, whenever it's going to happen, the economic impact or consequences of that are going to sway some people one way or another. I know it has been touched on about, one of the big slogans or about the Brexit debate was about the bus with we're giving the EU 350 million quid a week that could be used in the NHS, and it turned out to be rubbish. So in terms of the referendum, or referenda, there's going to be hardline unionists that will never vote for unity, even if you give them 10 million quid each. We get that. There's going to be, on the flip side, there's going to be ultra, very, very strong nationalist Republicans that, regardless of the economic consequences, they're going to support unity. In the middle, there's going to be this cohort that are going to look and go, how is this going to impact my life? Is it going to be affordable? Is there going to be better health service, better education, better job prospects, et cetera, et cetera? And what is really, really encouraging here is that the subvention, whatever model you look at, is going to be done away with in between 3 to 9 years. So there is going to be no subvention as we compare it to what the British give us in the block grant. In terms of the pensions, my view on this would be if people here have paid national insurance for X amount of years, they have entitlement to their UK state pension. My mother lived in the Republic or worked in the Republic for years. She gets a pension from the Irish state, and I think the British government should honour that. In terms of the debt, not one person who lives here has had any role in British government decisions in terms of borrowing, spending. It's the British government that has accrued that debt. I don't think anybody here should be asked to shoulder that burden. In terms of the myths around the cost of reunification, I know there are sort of conflicting views and theories on the costs, and it was good that you're able to debunk some of those myths and challenge those assertions. And what I would agree with, it is great that there is this study, the collaboration between Dublin City University and UU, that you've worked together to produce this plan, to produce these costings. But it'd be great if the Irish government took the lead on this. I know at our party conference, Claire Hanna said that the Irish government needs to start planning for unity. There needs to be a ministry for a new Ireland. So it would be great to see the Department of Finance in the South actually take responsibility for this. But here, really, really interesting presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But it shows that it is affordable. And standards 11 right across every 32 county will increase. So that's really great. Thank you, John.
Cormac, next up is Councillor Jackson.
Good Chair and John, it's brilliant to see you here. And I'm going to start by sort of declaring that I'm an Irish Republican, and I fall under the category that it was outlined earlier on that I have got involved in politics like many others because I have grown up seeing the partition has failed. Partition is failing everybody that lives in this part of Ireland, no matter what background they come from, where their allegiance lies, they're being failed by an imaginary line that was drawn over 100 years ago. And it is frustrating, and it has been frustrating when we're advocating for a new future, when we're speaking to lobby groups, different organisations, and showing that there's a better way forward, there's a more progressive way forward. We've got a blank page where we can design what our future could look like. And we're constantly There's constantly barriers placed in front of people's optimism and vision. We're constantly being told that it's a pipe dream, it's unaffordable. And what we're seeing now through academics like yourself, those myths being dispelled. And that gives us the confidence, it gives us the tools to enter in the arenas, to be advocates for a new future, and dispel the myths that have been spun for the establishment for far too long. And they're holding this place back. Now, I know, John, your report had focused in on the public finances, and it's a very useful piece of work, and I look forward to further reports. And again, providing information that can help shape a plan for what a new Ireland could look like. But and it certainly does that. It certainly poses questions as that we've seen here today, and it sparks the conversations. And again, it gives people hope and confidence that we can do this. That our future is within our own hands, and we can't be tied to decisions that have been taken over 100 years ago. But one of the things that hadn't been touched on, and I appreciate that it's beyond the realms of the report or the scope of the report, there's human costs attached to partition. One of the biggest challenges that we've got at the minute is our young people, our talented, educated young people, are looking at a future beyond these shores. They're looking to build careers for themselves, looking to build futures in other parts of the world. And it was encouraging to see that growth has been was incorporated into your report. But like if we're giving our young people reason to stay here, we're giving our young people hope, we're giving young people a bright future that isn't tied to decisions that are taken in London that by people who have no regard for anybody living here. There's that scope for growth is huge. And when we take that into context, the economics of a new Ireland could be immeasurable. So I am encouraged by works from people like yourselves, from other academics right across this island that are helping to dispel the myths and helping us and helping our advocates for a brighter future. They have the tools, they dispel the myths and make the arguments in the rooms. The other thing that that reports like this does, it puts pressure on governments. But for far too long, we've been told that now is not the time. For far too long, we've seen consecutive governments fail to start planning. Reports such as this and puts pressure on governments. They start the planning process, and I have no doubt that within the very near future, we will see a government in the 26 counties actively putting plans in place for the event of reunification. I have no doubt in that, and from our perspective, we will be keep pushing that wheel. And I and I suppose I would see myself as somebody in our party as anybody who hasn't convinced yet. They are within that middle ground. They are persuadables. Anybody that isn't convinced that we have a brighter future in front of us, we need to be having those conversations. You coming to this council today is helping getting that word out and helping to promote your report to the citizens of the city and district. And I have no doubt that there's a lot of people looking on that will be looking into this more and more detail and acknowledging that there is a brighter future, and they're acknowledging that a lot of what we've been told before isn't true. So I just again thank you for coming, and I look forward to hearing from and reading more of your work and all our academics in the field. Gramoget.
Carmel, Councillor Jackson, and we have Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Professor. Question that I would want answered before I carry on. Your professorship is in what field? Can't hear you.
I'm currently Vice President for Research for the University across all disciplines. My degrees are in politics, economics and sociology.
That's good. Thank you very
And
much.
I'm a part qualified chartered accountant for my sins as well.
Thank you. I go back to my own study days 57 years ago, sitting in philosophy class. And the one thing that has stuck to me with that is lies, damned lies and statistics. And I'm sure you've come across the phrase before. And Councillor Duffy referred to accurate information. What I'm hearing at the moment is supposition, as opposed to what I would regard as accurate information. Obviously, I'm coming from a completely different point of view than my colleagues left and right. And you'll forgive me if I say and use a term that Kelly Badenoff has used today. It's the second time I've had a waffle bomb. It has been pointed out in the chamber that there are those who will vote for unity, a united Ireland, no matter what. There are those who will not. There are those in the middle. And I suppose there are those who feel that unionism has lost ground. And I can agree to that in a certain degree. So support for unionism may have fallen, but that is not necessarily support for the union, which is where I believe this entire debate remains. My late grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was from County Monaghan, Ballybay. He joined the army. He was a Monaghan hurler. He joined the army in 1905 when he was demobbed in 1927. He couldn't return home. He couldn't go back to his home because of the situation that had developed within the island of Ireland. And I feel, has anything changed? The election of Catherine Connolly, to many, indicates that it is not. Because, the vilification of the other candidate was taken very poorly by a lot of folk, particularly in Northern Ireland. And I know a lot of folk, particularly in the border counties. They didn't take that extremely well. It's an indication that nothing has changed and that, don't want to prod about the house. That's the feeling that many have. Why has it taken, we're now 104 years on and there's still no concrete path that's there. Why is that? If it's such a desirable outcome that people would want. And this is not a vote about unity. This is a vote asking people to leave the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's what it's about. It's not about Irish unity. It's about leaving the United Kingdom as far as the populace of Northern Ireland is concerned. I can assure you that, it's the old thing that they'd eat grass to maintain, to remain a free nation, etc. I personally would accept an economic downturn to remain within the union. That's me. My family and many of my friends would, because the union to me is more than economics. My head of state, constitutional head of state, is His Majesty the King. It is not some foreign president in the Republic of Ireland. My currency is what it is, and I believe that the best future for the people of Northern Ireland lies within the Union. I haven't been persuaded by the argument that we've heard so far. And as you rightly pointed out, and others have pointed out, there's a lot more debate that needs to go around this, but I cannot see myself being persuaded. I mean, as I've said, you're asking us to leave the 5th richest economy in the world. I don't think that can be disputed. If we look at what is the position going to be of the British government, 6 of the 10 defence hubs are actually based in Northern Ireland, the United Kingdom defence hubs. Are they going to quietly abandon all of that? I can't see it. And indeed, a lot of the Republic of Ireland's defence strategy rests on British forces, whether it be the Navy or the Royal Air Force. Take the connection between North America via Coleraine, the cable connection through to Liverpool, through to Europe. All of that is defended by the Royal Navy. It's not the Irish Navy with its 6 ships, I think it is. They have enough men to man 2 of them. So there are all of those issues that will impact on any decision. And of course, the final decision will be, if it comes, a border poll. And the people of Northern Ireland will make their determination whether they wish to leave the United Kingdom or not. And at this moment in time, I don't believe that that middle ground is being persuaded. I certainly am not in the middle ground, but those that I know in the middle ground are not being persuaded. And if it couldn't be done in 104 years, you know, it is going to be done in the future. Perhaps your argument back on that might be, well, there wasn't the will, there wasn't the drive to actually do that. So why leave what is a fairly strong economic structure, the United Kingdom? It's a world leader in 5 sectors of the economy. World economy, world leader in 5 sectors. In Northern Ireland, we have a lower employment rate than the United Kingdom, unemployment rate than the United Kingdom, and indeed in the island of Ireland, and indeed in Europe. Those facts are there. You can chat to Peter Shearlow about that if you want. But again, I listen to other figures within this whole argument, and I haven't heard anything that overcomes what I've previously heard from those who would argue in favour of the unity of the United Kingdom. But thank you for your appearance. Thank you.
Carmel, Alderman Hussey, I'm just going to go back to you there. I have another indicated speaker, but I'm just going to let you get a chance to answer some of those questions first, okay?
I'll start with Alderman Hussey and work back if that's okay with people. There's a number of questions there. I think to start with your first comment on the attacks on Heather Humphreys during the campaign, I can assure you that they were, I think people were horrified by them, by and large, in the Republic of Ireland. People thought they were wound up by one tabloid journalist with a strong history of racism. So it was, Heather Humphreys was the next target for someone who had a strong track record of attacking migrants, travellers and others in the past. I don't think it represented any sort of common view, but people still were horrified by it, horrified that the Irish Daily Mail led with it so strong. I think the fact that you then had a mixture of far-right groups, and to their shame, I think some dissident Republican youth as well, sort of jumping on that. So I'm not saying it wasn't there, absolutely not, but I'm saying that the great bulk of people in the Republic of Ireland were as horrified by that as they were, but obviously it's more keenly felt for members of the Protestant community in Northern Ireland. That I do absolutely accept. Why no plan? I think the Irish government would have to answer that question. It's increasingly, I think in the past it's pretty clear from the historical records that they were not exactly sort of stamping at the bit to end partition. I mean, it's pretty clear from the late 60s and early 70s that when the British government at that stage in 70 and 71 looked like they would at least consider a precipitous withdrawal, that actually the Irish government lobbied very strongly against it in private at that time, despite the rhetoric that they were winding people up with in public. So in some ways, there's a track record there of saying one thing and doing the opposite. But I think it's a different context, except it's no more palatable for you, nor one that you'd be likely to support. And all the evidence we have to date would suggest that at a minimum, probably of about 42% of the population holds similar views to your own, that they would accept an economic downturn, they would trade issues of economic and health. So there's probably, for those arguing the pro-union side, they probably have 42% in the bag before they start campaigning. I would think that's not much below that. It's probably changing over time. In 20 years, it could be a different figure. But if it was to happen in the next 5 years, I think that 42% is almost immovable. And the only thing that's at play is the other 58% of the population. I think you're correct in your analysis of that. And it wouldn't matter in terms of economic, health policy, infrastructure, and those other issues. I think the reason, though, I think the middle ground is playing its cards. I think you're right in the sense, if a referendum was held tomorrow, which is what pollsters ask, with no preparation and no plan, I would think it has 99 chances out of 100 of being defeated. It's never 100 of 100. David Cameron called a referendum which he thought he could control, that he was the Prime Minister and he could play games and position himself within the party. I mean, there's an unknown quantity, and that's why I think whether people are for or against United Ireland, having a referendum early with no preparation would be a disaster, no matter which side won the debate, because the outcome would be not a good outcome, whatever happened there afterwards, because people on the losing side would felt that they weren't given a fair chance to take part in the debate. It would be like Boris's bus and promises of the health system. But I didn't know we're leaving the single market. I didn't know we're leaving the customs union. You weren't actually voting for the same thing at all on either side. So I think that would lead a referendum call in the short term to be, I think, clearly defeated at the moment. The question is whether those people would change their mind into the future. Not the 42%, but the 16, 18% in the middle, who probably, I think, a bit less than 27%, but probably there is something close to 20% who genuinely don't have a strong view on cultural or religious or sort of ideological grounds, and probably would make up their mind quite close to the end sort of game. And it's those questions. And I suppose I would just correct, I mean, it is a vote to leave on one level, but the Good Friday Agreement is framed explicitly that it's a single vote, that there's only two options it's a single vote to leave and become part of a new United Ireland. The option of independent Northern Ireland or voting for something different was consciously removed by the two governments at that time, despite some lobbying for it to be a number of options on the table. So it is both leave and join in the same vote. There'll only be one question, but it is a leaving and a joining. And I suppose for a large economy, that is be a strong argument on the pro-union side. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. The scale of the UK economy, no matter if gold was struck in every hill in the Republic of Ireland, just the scale is different. I suppose the big question is whether at the micro level for individuals, average wages in the South are now probably 30 to 40% higher than they are in the North, whereas the cost of living is about 12% higher. So there's a very significant gap in education, living standards. And the question of what cuts through, because you'll always find one thing in the South that's dearer, you'll always point to housing. Most people don't listen to macroeconomic analysis. They'll fix them on a couple of things. And you can talk about percentage growth, but you can pick the poorest country in the world, and if they go from 1% to 2%, there's 100% growth, but they're still the poorest country in the world. And so I think a lot of it will probably end up, if it say was happening in 10 years' time, so at least a future we can sort of imagine not radically different to today. I think cost of living, wage levels, health services, for that 18% or 20% in the middle, not for people who have their mind made up, but for that group in the middle, I think they will look more at the personal than at the broad economic debate. And that's my sense of where that would be. Unemployment, thankfully, is low north and south, so I think it's about the quality of jobs. And even the recent executive report into Invest Northern Ireland, it was a critique of Invest Northern Ireland for being overly fixated on just creating any job rather than a good job. And that was a a fairly disastrous strategy when unemployment was near zero. And you can just look, I was doing for something else, looking at the IDA and Invest Northern Ireland recent annual reports. So the average wage in an IDA supported company last year was 65,000 euros, and there was no wage. There was no job created in an IDA firm with a wage level below 35,000 euros. And the average wage in Invest Northern Ireland supported company was 35,000 sterling. So there's about a third difference in terms of, so Invest Northern Ireland haven't really made that transition from wanting to win. They want the quick win. So you'll accept a call center, you'll accept whatever jobs that people are not certainly attracted back to Northern Ireland for. I think it was Councillor Jackson talked about migration, and there is other issues. And one of the reasons for coming here and events like this is not just to promote what we've already done, but in some ways, there's a million things academics could research. But as elected representatives, whatever your views right now, what are the things we should be researching? Because they're actually what your constituents are talking about. And that allows us to be a bit more focused in our choices. We haven't done something on migration, but there is a lot of research being done, particularly on graduates. You don't need to come to this city and tell you there's not enough university places in Northern Ireland. There's more university students in a medium-sized town like Carlow than there is here. So it's a really significant deficit in both further and higher education in the Northwest. It's out of kilter with the rest of the island in a serious way. And we know from all sorts of regional studies that companies come to where they've confidence they can recruit. And they assume a certain laziness in the labour market. So if you're doing something in life sciences and you know the local university is churning out 200 science graduates every year, you'll assume you have a fair chance of persuading some of them to come work for you. Whereas they're graduating in Glasgow or London, well, what's your chances of persuading them back? And we know of those young people from Northern Ireland who go to study in England, Scotland and Wales, about 67% of them don't return to Northern Ireland to work and live. So a loss of bright, experienced, and obviously migration is good over and back. If there was a different group coming in, you'd say, well, that's after coming back 10 years later, you'd say, great, they're coming back now with loads of experience. But the problem is they're not coming back at all. And so that's a real loss of talent to the local economy. And I think I was just doing some work with Dundalk and Newry Chambers of Commerce over the last year, because they've been trying to sell that sort of, sorry, just opening up the figures here. They've been trying to look at that as sort of a sub-region along the sort of Dublin-Belfast corridor. So looking at sort of the Newry Moran district area down into Louth. I mean, Dundalk obviously was an economic basket case in the mid-1990s. It was really in a bad way. Dundalk is now absolutely hopping. It's a thriving town. At the moment, according to government figures, there's about 4,500 people working in IDA-supported factories in Dundalk. The housing pressures are almost as bad as they are further south in Drogheda and North Dublin. It was, and so you're getting companies there. They're worried they've hit the upper limit of that growth of the last 10 years because of sort of housing and infrastructure. But they have a good location. They're on the motorway. They're on the train. They're near the airport. But Newry's only 12 miles away. It has all the same advantages, more or less. And actually, because of the congestion, the Chambers of Commerce were cooperating to try and sort of, not seeing it as a loss, but actually, if there was more jobs on both sides of the border, that'd be good for everybody because companies, supply each other. The last figures I was able to get, so there's 36 IDA supported companies with 4,500 jobs in Dundalk. There's 12 GB or international companies in Newry support with 143 jobs. That's the last figures I was able to get. Like, it's night and day in terms of not only wage levels, but the numbers. There's a challenge around the multinationals, Councillor Harkin, and there's issues there around their intellectual property and the global South justice issues around that, because some of that income was earned in Kenya or Tanzania, really poor countries in the world. But in terms of, there's still about 560,000 people working for multinationals in the Republic, mostly earning decent wages, mostly in secure jobs. That's real activity of trading, not the fly-by-night profits in and out stuff. There's about a little less than 90,000 people working for either GB or international companies in the north of Ireland. There's a huge gap in that productivity, wage level issues. And I think those are probably where more work needs to be done. Like, what are the barriers right now to Northern Ireland attracting companies, and we're hoping to have a piece published just before Christmas with decision makers and multinationals and the state agencies and the advisors like PwC and Deloitte and that, trying to go, what do they think has been the barriers to a company who's paying shocking rents and shocking wages in Dublin? Why have they not looked north, where they could probably find those graduates, where rent levels are about 50% what they are in Dublin and wages about 60%, and yet almost none of them in the social media, ICT, software space. It's hard to find a single company who's actually moved their employment. So it's trying to look at some of those short-term and longer-term issues. But I think those are probably the debates that we're looking at. Is trying to keep people at home. And I mean, the surveys that were done by others, as you know, some people just went abroad because that's what they wanted to do. They just wanted to live abroad for a while. But it was people that didn't like the political climate. You know, so there was a social, cultural piece of it. Just people thought Northern Ireland was closed in. They didn't like the party politics set up. So there was that sort of person. But wages was a huge chunk of it. People, you know, just felt, well, I can earn more in Birmingham or Edinburgh or Liverpool or wherever than I can earn back home, substantially more. And so I think in terms of those supply issues, labour supply issues, if there was, I think maybe someone's gone for 20 years, chances are they're not going to uproot their life and come home. But if you're only 5 years in Manchester and there's a job home near family and friends at a decent wage level, I think, you know, people are still mobile at that stage and are people coming back. So I think migration, and that's been the experience in the South during periods of boom. Yeah, outflow to Australia or England or America, and then the economy turns and you get an inflow back in at the recent. We saw that with the Poles in the Republic of Ireland. You had a couple of 100,000 Poles came in immediately after the labour market opened up when they joined. Polish economy has been booming for the last 4 or 5 years. The ones who were settled with family, perhaps married, Irish people were well settled, but those that only been 4 or 5, 6 years in the Republic, very many of them have come back to Poland now and they're working in a booming economy there. So you know, migration is reversible. It's not a once-off decision for many people. For some it is, but I think it is possible with the right economic model and conditions to get people home as well.
Okay, don't have any indicated speakers online, so just one more speaker in the room, that's Councillor Leonard.
Look, thank you, Chair. John, I just want to add my thanks as well to you and to your team. I'm sure you didn't do all that hard work on your own, so I acknowledge the work that your team have done in presenting this information just today. It's good to see this conversation taking place in this chamber and right across our island. And I do hope that this is going to be the catalyst to many more reports from academics, professions like yourself, looking into other matters that concern people a lot, like health, welfare, and education. I can certainly speak for myself and say I have a huge will and drive, like my party colleagues, in our journey for reunification. But I would like to say that the treatment of Heather Humphreys was totally wrong. So any person, no matter who they are, what party or where they come from, that are brave enough to put their head above the parapet, should be treated with respect at all times. Gormagat.
Gormagat, Councillor Leonard. Okay, that's us. Mila Buhas, Arish. As Chuck and Sean, you, John, so thank you very much for coming here today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing that report coming out around Christmas time. Okay, so that's you now, unless you want to stay for the rest. Mila Buhas. Okay, moving on then to the rest of the meeting. Grow and Higherly, Chairperson's business. I don't have any from anybody, but I just want to bring up myself to congratulate the council staff and especially the Carnival Initiative and all the community organisations who were involved in the Halloween celebrations. Obviously, we can't control the weather, but for everybody that was able to make any of the events, I myself was down one night and then on the parade and the fireworks, and I have to say, as usual, it was outstanding. I had family up who absolutely loved it, and we really look forward to seeing what's to come in the 40th celebrations next year. Real, just growing year after year, and it's just an absolute it's an honour and a real pride to be from, like working for this council and to be able to say to, people that you're working along with the Halloween celebration. So I just want to put on record my thanks to all involved in the celebrations. Okay, so moving on to matters arising from the open minutes of the Governance and Strategic Planning Committee held on Tuesday, the 7th of October, 2025. Anybody have anything to bring up? Councillor Harkin?
Thank you, Chair. And I've got two issues. The first one is GSP 18425. And we had representation in here from the Housing Executive recently, which was very, very useful. And thank you to council officers for circulating the letter from the Communities Minister regarding council's remit in terms of HMOs. There is useful information in there. The one thing I would say is that it very much disappoints me and disappoints others that the minister responsible for housing has only taken an interest in this recently, when he's tied it to dog whistle politics connected to saying there's too many asylum seekers, which isn't true. The other thing is, I would just want to thank council officers for following up on the call for an urgent meeting with the Communities Minister or members of his department, officials from his department, in regard to his announcement that the funding for housing associations, the funding grant, would be slashed. We've got notice now that there's going to be a meeting with the Housing Division on December 8th, and I think that'll be a very important meeting for the council. There's a number of things that I think we want to address, and we want to see that other people expect us to address with the Housing Minister as well.
Okay. And do you want to move on with your second piece then, Councillor Harkin?
Thank you. I want to welcome the fact that Belfast City Council has joined the Derry City and Strabane District Council in calling for the Education Minister to resign. I want to welcome as well that more than 30 MLAs in Stormont have signed a petition which will allow a debate next week calling for the Minister to resign. I think whether or not the Minister chooses to resign, it may be out of our control, but I think it's very important that people send the loudest possible message about their anger and disbelief about what the Minister has done. And that's important to people across the north, across Ireland, but also globally. And I think we're also showing our solidarity with the ongoing suffering of people in Gaza and right across Palestine. It is this month is November 29th of this month marks the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I would like to propose that the council buildings are lit up in Palestinian colours on that day to mark this council and our ongoing solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I've sent that proposal through to Paula right now. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, just to confirm, Councillor Harkin, is that, where is it referencing into matters arising?
Apologies. Thanks, Chair. 186/25.
Sorry, I'm just waiting for the proposal to come up on screen. Councillor McDaid, but I do see you have your hand up there. Okay, councillor McDaid.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Councillor Harkin, for bringing that proposal. I'm happy to second it if it needs a seconder. I think that I agree that Belfast Council showed a real strength last night with the support that they've shown to the Palestinian people and to backing the proposal to call on the Education Minister to resign. And I was happy to see that there seems to be cross-party kind of support for the petition of concern in his position. I think that we've hashed over this last week already, so I'm not going to go on about it too much around the Education Minister and around the Department of Education and their role in promoting what he was doing in Israel. But I think that we need to continue to show solidarity, and I think by lighting up in the Palestinian colours is a nice kind of gesture, and it is gestures, but I think gestures are as important as actions as well at this time. Thank you.
Councillor Duffy.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Harkin for bringing this. This is something that we have done in previous years, and it was an act of solidarity to the Palestinian people at a different stage in the struggle that they have been enduring. We're now in the midst of genocide, and I do think that we do welcome the fact that Belfast City Council supported the motion of no confidence, and that the motion towards assembly has received over 30 signatures at this point. I think that the Minister's defence of his position through media channels over recent days has been nothing short of shocking and dismissing of real genuine concerns that people have right across the north in relation to the genocide that is going on for the last 2 years. So I think that any small gesture that we can make as a council, we should be making it, and we have done this before, so I don't see an issue with it now.
Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's generally accepted that there are two parts to this story. There are two peoples who have been in conflict. There is hurt on both sides of that line between residents of Gaza and residents of the State of Israel. Post or in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas terrorist invasion of Israel in October the 7th, the leader of Councillor Harkin's party posted a statement which I understand is still actually there on his website. I'm not sure. Can Councillor Harkin clarify, does he condone or condemn that statement that was made with regard to the attack on innocent civilians across the Israeli border?
Yeah, look,
Councillor Harkin, you're welcome to come in on that if you want.
sure. Alderman Hussey, I think that since October 7th, we've been saying again and again that everything that has happened and the reasons for October 7th happened on October 6th, happened on October 5th, happened on October 4th, happened on October 3rd, and have been happening since 1948 or back to the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Yes, the Jewish people and the Palestinian people are embroiled in this conflict, but only one side has the support of the biggest military in the world. The United States has the support of the British state, who are nuclear armed states. Israel itself is a nuclear armed state. So this is not an even struggle. It's not two people fighting it out. It is the oppressed against the oppressor, and Palestinians have the right to resist. You might not like that, but under international law, if you're occupied, you have a right to resist. You may not like the way in which the oppressed sometimes fight back, but they have the right to resist. And that's what October 7th was. That doesn't mean you have to endorse everything that happened. But October 7th only happened because of the conditions that exist inside Gaza, which have just got worse and worse and worse, giving people no option to take very drastic action. And we've seen in the last 2 years what the Israeli state is willing to do. Its terrorism has just got worse. So look, you know, I think we've been debating this out. I'm happy to debate it, but I don't want to keep the chair here.
Okay, Councillor Hussey, Alderman Hussey, I will let you back in very briefly, okay?
It's just to give my interpretation of the reply I've received. I have heard a representative of People Before Profit condoning Hamas terrorism. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a proposal on the floor from Councillor Harkin and it has been seconded by Councillor McDaid. Will we take it to vote or can we assume that, are you abstaining or are you voting against, Alderman Hussey?
I'll be voting against.
Okay, Chair, I think there are 12 members present, either in the chamber or online. Can we assume that there are 11 for and 1 abstaining? Sorry, that may not be the case. Alderman Wilkinson
One
is
against.
online.
Against, not abstaining.
Alderman Wilkinson? Okay. 11 members present, 1 against, remainder 4. Right, thank you.
Okay, can I get the chat? That's Alderman Wilkinson there online.
Chair.
Sorry, was that Alderman Wilkinson there speaking? We couldn't see who it was.
Just online, there's just bad connection there and also against.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other matters arising from the open minutes from last month? No, okay. Moving on then to Alfie, and he's going to take us through the Q2 financial outturn 25-26.
Thank you, Chair. Members, the report is to approve our 6-month financial outturn position. Just for your information, the 81.85 million budget that we agreed back at rates is summarised for you in section 2.1 of the report. Beyond that, we have a contingency reserve given some of the very unpredictable risks we face, particularly in relation to rates appeals and rates income. So members, within that context, the detailed report for Q2 is set out in Appendix 1 for your information. You'll note that the outturn position is currently 441k ahead of target. That compares with 308k at the Q1 report, so an improvement. 3 big issues, members, contributing to that, very similar to the last report. The first relates to investment interest. We obviously are progressing significant savings towards the building of our new leisure centres. That means we have a significant amount of funds on long-term deposit across a very well diversified portfolio of investment, which is earning us higher than usual interest. So that is a favourable variance of over 800k. Against that, the key pressure, 450k, relates to our district fund. Obviously, the rates process is around the corner, and one of the pressures in that process we're trying to avoid is the reduction strategy in relation to our district fund. So, all being well, we're on target of that, and hopefully it'll have no implications for the upcoming rates. The third significant area, members, you'll see that service income is well ahead of budget across a range of our services, which is really positive. In particular, leisure. You'll know, obviously, we're saving those revenue budgets in terms of the new leisure builds. There are some costs against that, in that we have a number of commitments within Health and Community that have recently been approved through Health and Community Committee and our recent capital projects approval report. A number of smaller issues, members, detailed in the report as well. Couple of issues that aren't significant variances. So rate support grant, we're 41k positive, but in terms of the bigger picture, there's been a bit of progress in that regard. So the ministerial review of the grant is now concluded. We've received a report. It's disappointing given what we submitted into the process, and that it really just looks at the process of the grant as opposed to the importance and the quantum of it for the less wealthy and more rural and deprived councils. So, members, we're just in receipt of that report. We're reviewing in advance of bringing a more detailed report to you at next committee and trying to suggest next steps in terms of engagement around that. Separately, the judicial review by Mid-Ulster Council has concluded, and it's now clear there'll be no additional financial compensation to any of the impacted councils, which is also unfortunate. In terms of rates income, members, LPS are currently forecasting a broadly break-even position. So obviously housing growth has continued, so we're 345 up in that regard, but in relation to non-domestic growth, that is minus because of revaluation appeals mainly, which is a continued challenge for us given that there's a new revaluation process coming into effect from 1st of April 26. We do retain a provision for that, and I suppose the position we're in at the minute emphasises the importance of that. So members, the last issue, you'll recall the discussion at last month's committee around the packaging levy that we will receive 2.9 million over what we had budgeted for this year. Discussions have progressed and are concluding between DAERA and Solus in that regard in terms of how the money can be utilised. So no underspend has been reported, and as soon as those discussions with DAERA are concluded, a report will be brought to members to consider allocation of that money. Finally, members, more on the strategy side of it, paragraphs 4.5 and 4.6 of the report are nearly attempting to forecast where we would be at the end of the year. And I think at this point it's fairly, unless things go wrong, we should be in a surplus 600k position. That's majority relating to bank interest, which is to do with our strategic leisure facilities. So the proposed strategy in the report is we should be putting that towards our capital fund at the end of the year towards those facilities, and ultimately that will reduce the amount that we need to borrow for those facilities. So members, that's the key issues. The recommendations are that you approve the outturn position as detailed in Appendix 1 and also the Treasury Management Monitoring Report in Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we have the report there in front of you. I need a proposer and seconder for that. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Alfie, for the report. And I just want to focus in on the increased income, and I suppose it's not surprising because we're starting to see a trend, not only increase in our leisure usage, but increase in the number of visitors that are attending this building and come to this building, and seeing the income is generated through that. So I just wanted to congratulate everybody who is involved in our leisure services, in our museum services, and working within the Guildhall itself, just bringing an income and they support this council. I know that a lot of that work I just want to, well, make it clear that it doesn't, it's very much appreciated by us and those that are availing of the fantastic facilities within the museum services, which is due to be upgraded significantly. So it bodes well for us investing in our museum services and investing in our leisure. And we expect that usage to continue in an upward trajectory. So just from our perspective, to congratulate everybody that's involved. No issue proposing the recommendation, but I do look forward to hearing or to seeing a more detailed report in relation to the RIT support grant and more detailed information in relation to the producer package and levy, which will be critical as we enter into the RIT support grant or the RITs process. So there's we look forward to more information. I know there was a fleeting mention within the report, but we do need to see more detail in relation to that, and appreciate Alfie doesn't have it at this stage, but it's integral that it'd be integral in terms of our decision-making process as part of the RITs, that we have as much information as possible. But in relation to our hugely ambitious capital plans, and it's been mentioned before, whilst we're receiving interest in terms of the money that we've set aside, we're also conscious of the levels of inflation, and particularly in relation to construction inflation. So it makes sense, and it is prudent that we prepare for that, and the recommendation is that the money set aside they support that capital programme, and from our perspective, we're always supportive of that. So happy to propose. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Alfie, for the report. And there's several things I wanted to raise. One is just to say, yes, it's great to see that there is revenue being generated through our leisure services and through the museum service, and that it'd be useful to get a breakdown of that, how that has come about, because the discussions that I was involved in terms of our leisure services was to keep prices low and make them affordable for as many people across the district as possible, and then target groups in order to encourage people to actually utilise our leisure services. And if that strategy is paying off, I think that people have done a lot of work to make that happen, and it's good to see it. It's good to see people using our leisure services in general. That's a positive thing for a whole number of reasons. So I don't know if you've got any more detailed information on that. Then just the rate support grant. I mean, from what you're saying, Alfie, about the consultation that was done and the report that's come out, it sounds like you're saying that the focus on process means that there will not be any change of direction from the minister around increasing the rate support grant. And if that's the case, that's very, very disappointing. I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm surprised, given that the rate support grant has been cut year on year. And we've talked about ministers starving this district and Derry of funding. And I think that cutting the rate support grant is a way to do that. It starves this district of desperately needed funding. And that's why the people in this district paid disproportionately higher rates to many of the what you would call wealthier council areas across the north. So the second thing on the rate support grant is that the report says that the Mid-Ulster challenge judicial review, it was upheld on one front, but that there won't be any financial compensation as a result of that, which strikes me as very, very disappointing. And can you give us a bit more insight into how the judicial review can be held up and shown to be prejudicial against rural areas, but not lead to any financial compensation to the Mid-Ulster Council but then the other councils who would be impacted by that, because that seems, and maybe if you can shed a bit of light on the other part of the judicial review that wasn't held up. And thank you to the Mid-Ulster Council for taking that judicial review, because the Minister and the department need to be challenged on these cuts in general. And then the last one is just about the additional funding that's going to come through the extended the packaging levy. That means that we're going to hopefully have, well, we will have 3 million, almost £3 million additional coming into the council that we didn't necessarily think we were going to have. And if there was no restrictions placed on the earlier money that has already come through, I wouldn't imagine that there's going to be 3 million any restrictions placed on the additional money. So that's positive for the council, and that gives us some money to work with. We're already thinking about the rates next year, but there are there's things that we wanted to fund this year that we didn't. For example, like Coshquin Play Park. So I think that if that money's coming into the council, I think that it's great that it is, and I think we can think about what we're going to do with it. Thank you.
Councillor Harkin, I'm going to bring in, is it John? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the first point, and then maybe say a general word about rate support grant, and maybe ask Alfie and Philip to come in as well. On the EPR, just need to be careful what I say, Councillor Harkin, in respect to that, but it's clear at this stage that EPR funding is to be used for, and I'm paraphrasing here in terms of the PAC UK requirements, but for the effective collection and management of waste. The EPR monies are being provided for the effective collection and management of waste. The discussion that's ongoing with DERA at the minute is that DERA is suggesting that it should be used to improve waste collection. And so it's a very fine line in terms of what the exact requirement, but there's no doubt that at this minute in time, the scheme is that EPR monies are to be used for the effective collection of waste. The opportunity for council is that council has obviously allocated a budget toward waste, and any potential underspend that comes from that as a result of the additional money that is coming from the EPR scheme for waste is where the opportunity arises. Alfie, myself and others are just grappling with that at the moment, and we hope to provide a clearer position to members. But there is most certainly an opportunity, and it's just how we phrase it, and it's how we account for that going forward that provides that opportunity. And yes, there are a range of pressures that council is currently facing, both in year and foreseen coming. And there will be some suggestions as to how some of that additional money could be used. In relation to the rate support grant, JR in particular, we'll ask more knowledgeable colleagues to speak to it, but I think the key issue is that the rate support grant does not have a statutory amount attached to it. And that is the issue. The issue is in terms of there could be a favourable outcome in terms of the process, but not necessarily a favourable outcome in terms of the quantum. But perhaps Philip can speak more knowledgeably about that, Chair.
Yep, Chair. Members, if you'll recall that this council did in fact participate in that judicial review as a notice party, and I was present in court whenever the judgment was handed down in relation to the matter, although the essentially, yes, the court found that the rates found for the councils in respect of the judicial review on the rural issues ground, but indicated that it was of the view that budgets had already been allocated and the money spent, and consequently, in terms of remedy, was not minded to make any formal order compelling the reinstatement of the rate support grant. Judgment's extremely detailed in relation to why the other issues were unsuccessful and the rural issues ground was successful. If members wish, I can provide members with a copy of the judgment and a summary of the key parts in relation to that. But that's essentially the position as to why although we were successful, the rate support grant wasn't reinstated.
Okay, I'll for you coming in that.
Just the other grounds that the case was on was there was 3: irrationality, equality, and want of consultation. So there was obviously a very strong case made in those regards, but obviously not upheld by the judge. In terms of the minister's review, it's not a positive review. It's very process focused, as I've said. We want to go through every bit of that review indeed. As you know, we submitted a very comprehensive document into that review, but because the review was really process focused, that document wasn't really taken on board. So I suppose what we need to decide as a council is, with that document in hand, which presents very strong evidence in relation to the rates process in Northern Ireland, what our next steps are in relation to that. But certainly the report, as it is at the minute, doesn't give us much encouragement in terms of the outlook for the grant going into next year. So as said, I'm bringing a detailed report to next month's committee, and obviously the issues that were raised around the court case, we're happy to incorporate those within that report as well, if that's okay. Just in relation to the leisure income, it's totally to do with usage, not prices. Prices have remained frozen for a long time, as you'll be aware, so it's totally usage is driving the increased income levels. Thank you.
And Councillor Taylor.
Chair, sorry, thank you, and I'll welcome the report. My question was answered by John around the limitations of that money around the packaging and what they were. I do have a number of questions about the rate support grant, but I suppose they're probably better waiting till we get the report back. But from what I'm hearing, Alfie, are you saying that we had a document that was sent in and was basically ignored as part of the review, and we have now come up with, or the minister has now come out with a decision from a review where the voice of councils, the people who depend on that money, was ignored? Thank you, Chair.
So at the start of the review, there was a terms of reference issued before the consultants were appointed, and that terms of reference was very narrow, very process focused. So we challenged that strongly and says the review needs to be much wider than that. There's no point in talking about a process if the amount of money is inadequate in the first place. So the consultants that were engaged as part of the process, we met as officials. We asked them to come and meet our council. They weren't prepared to do that. We made the case very strongly that that should be part of the review, and we provided them with a detailed document that not only our council but the 11 councils and NOGA adopted as an 11 council position. So that was provided, but because the terms of reference weren't widened like we would have liked them to be, so I suppose the review sets out what it set out to achieve at the start, but in our view very strongly that wasn't broad enough and needs to be relooked at.
Okay, Alderman Hussey.
Thank you, Chair. On this particular point, the question was what to do next. Is there a case for seeking to present that report to the relevant Stormont Committee, whether that be the Department of Finance or Department for Communities?
Yep, so we obviously need to consider our next steps very seriously, and I suppose to do something that will make a difference. We've tried so hard in many different ways to try and do something about this. We've spent a lot of time in developing that report, There was a lot of work went into that, so it's a very strong basis for presenting an argument. So we'll certainly consider that. The recommendation before next month's committee will be recommending what are the next steps we take and seeking your endorsement for that. So those comments will be taken on board. Alderman Hussey, thank you.
Councillor Jackson?
Oh, just a very, and it's been touched on, but I know the report had been presented to this committee, come back a while. I know it was presented to the NILGA. It was presented to NILGA, and as a member of the NILGA Executive Board, I know that it was very well received. Everybody appreciated the work that went on there, and it spelled it out very clear around the importance and the importance of the quantum. So it was a fantastic piece of work. And the fact that it was endorsed by the 11 councils shows, and bear in mind that not all 11 councils, it would have been in their interest to support it, but it shows the wider political support that the work that this council received. So we should be looking at what other avenues we've got to present that and to make our case. But I'll look forward to seeing a more detailed report coming back the next month. But in relation to the work that was carried out on behalf of this council, I've seen it from first-hand experience, how well it was received throughout all our councils across the north. Thanks, Chair.
Carmichael, okay, so we have two recommendations in front of us here on this paper. Councillor Jackson proposed, so we'll just need a seconder. Councillor Leonard, thank you. Okay, so moving on then.
Just before you do move on, on the back of the current update on financial position, at what stage will we be given figures for prospective rates situation next year? Normally at this time of year would already be there.
So similar to last year, we'll be arranging briefings before Christmas. There's a number of bits of information we need to receive. So things like rate support grant, things like EPR levy, need to make judgments around inflation in terms of all those. So we'll be doing party briefings before Christmas, and then we'll have the normal schedule of council meetings throughout January.
Cheers, Chair, thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the next item, and that's, I'm going to hand you over to Philip.
Thank you, Mayor. Members, the purpose of this report is to advise of correspondence received from the Department in relation to the Public Office Accountability Bill and to seek endorsement of a proposed response. So, members, the correspondence is at Appendix 1 of your pack, and a copy of the draft bill is at Appendix 2. Copy of the draft response is at Appendix 3. Very briefly, members, this bill is intended to impose a statutory duty of candour, transparency and frankness on public authorities and officials. It would extend to council officers, does not extend to elected members of council operating committee structure. The current proposal is that Part 1 of the bill and Chapters 1 and 2 of Part 2 are intended to extend to Northern Ireland at the present time, and I've summarised at paragraph 3.3 therefore the key clauses of the bill in respect of those paragraphs. Members, those are what are sort of popularly known as the Hillsborough provisions, and they arise out of the issues that have arisen in public inquiries in relation to matters such as the Hillsborough inquiry and the infected blood. Members, there's no particular equality rule needs or legal financial implications in relation to the bill at the present time.
Carmichael, Philip, can I have a proposer and a seconder for that? Alderman Hussey, propose and second. Councillor Farrell. Okay, and on to the next one then we have John. It's agenda item number 10, co-address the correspondence.
Sorry, that should be Philip.
Yeah.
It's correspondence with an attached draft response to it. Maybe Chair Philip will take us through
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Thanks, Mayor, Chair, sorry. Yeah, members, again, it's simply to advise of correspondence received and to seek endorsement of the draft response. Members, the correspondence received from the State Board of Administration of Florida dated 7th October 25 has been received by the Mayor. That correspondence is attached at Appendix 1. You will see, members, from the correspondence that it requires the Council to clarify its policies with regard to Israel and that the Council may become subject to boycott, prohibition and divestment by SBA dependent upon the response. Members, we have no financial relationship with SBA of any kind, and consequently the proposed draft stating the Council's position in relation to these matters is set out at Appendix 2.
Okay, so I need somebody to propose and second this. Yep, Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's long stated our council's support for the BDS campaign. It's no surprise that there are those that try to impede a legitimate campaign, a legal campaign, and I suppose I want to just state that, like, I think I brought a proposal that council adopt a BDS approach in 2016. In the years following that, I was bombarded with legal threats, with threats of sanction against me personally and all of that. It's nonsense. And I suppose in terms of the proposed response that's in front of us, I have absolutely no issue reaffirming our support for BDS and endorsing the response that's to be sent back on behalf of council. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Tierney.
Chair, thank you. And similar to Councillor Jackson, we would be happy to endorse the response from council. I know we don't do this anymore, but I'm almost tempted to say I wouldn't waste the price of a stamp by even responding. This council, as I see it, have no notion whatsoever to change our policy around BDS, and that's the way it should be. This is an attempt to try and shake people, and I don't think it's going to work with this council. So we're happy that the response be sent, and we're happy that the position around BDS remains the same within the council, not that it's ever been in question. Thank you.
Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, this is a bizarre request, and I would wonder about the authenticity of this letter. That's how bizarre it is. I'm sure that that's been checked by council officers to make sure it's real and not someone, whether it's real or not, it's obviously an attempt to try and intimidate the council and intimidate us out of support for Palestinian self-determination in opposition to genocide. And obviously this will not work. And I think I very much endorse, as others have, the response from council. Thanks.
Alderman Hussey.
Just to say I welcome the clarification on the address of this particular fund, and if there are individuals or organisations within my part of the world who are seeking financing, I will quite happily direct them to that particular body.
Okay, are members content to support this recommendation, or do we need to? Alderman Hussey. Okay, Alderman Hussey is abstaining in this one, so do we need to take this to vote then, John?
Just check with you, Chair. Is Alderman Wilkinson online?
Yeah, it's online.
Would you like to comment on to Alderman Wilkinson, which are you in support of the recommendation or?
I was then.
You'll abstain. 12 members present. Members, I'm assuming everyone, pardon? Sorry, there are no longer 12. I'm going to have to go to a vote, sorry. Alderman Hussey's abstaining. Alderman Wilkinson abstaining. Councillor Farrell. Councillor Harkin. Councillor Jackson. Councillor Leonard.
Ta.
Councillor McDade is not here. Councillor McGinley is not here. Councillor Mooney, not here. Councillor Tierney and Councillor Nealis. 6, 4, 2 abstentions. Thank you.
Okay, moving on then to agenda item number 11, and we have John.
Thank you, Chair. That's fairly self-explanatory, dovetails in with the presentation. As members be aware, this council has a constitutional change working group. Donegal County Council has a similar working group. There has been ongoing discussion about members in both working groups sharing information. We are now in receipt of a formal invitation from Donegal County Council for members of the Darren Serban working group to participate in one of its meetings. Now, just to let you know, members, that their meeting scheduled for tomorrow, I've just received information, has been cancelled. They are looking to reschedule that. That probably suits from our perspective. So if members are wishing to participate, and I'm assuming those on the working group who have proposed it are, then the recommendation is that members, as it is an all-member working group, that members indicate to yourselves if they wish to attend a future meeting of the Donegal Constitutional Change Working Group. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, Chair, but I would like at this stage to declare an interest of all members of the Sinn Féin team. Now, I appreciate we don't have a date of when the rescheduled meeting would take place, but like I can ask everybody to individually, or everybody will in their own, but individually register an interest with Council Corbett, but it might be more expedient if I were to do it now. They say that all members of our team would be extremely interested in being part of this. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether Councillor Jackson proposed the recommendations or not. If he did, I'm happy to second it. I think it's a great idea, to be honest. And similar to Councillor Jackson, I'll make the same declaration on behalf of the SDLP. But I'm kind of hoping that officers are going to follow up with an individual email to people as well to allow them to, time commitments and one thing and another. But in terms of supporting the proposal and supporting the idea, we're definitely up for it, providing times and dates suit. Well, then individual councillors will have to make their own plans there, but the SDLP will be represented at it one way or another. Thank you, Chair.
Alderman Hussey, I'll bring you in now. Can I just check, Councillor Jackson, were you proposing that? Yep, that's proposed by Councillor Jackson then, seconded by Councillor Tierney. Alderman Hussey?
Sure, I just want to highlight the principle that Council has agreed this particular working group and all members of Council are invited to be part of it, whether they partake or not. So it is an established Council group, and they are in principle now being asked to go to meetings elsewhere, and the costs of that will be covered by Council, and in principle I have no problem with that, but it should occur it should apply universally throughout council, that if somebody is an appointed representative of this council and the group that they have been appointed onto decides that they wish to go somewhere else, relative to that, the same principle should apply. And I think Councillor Turner knows exactly what I'm referring to there.
Councillor Tierney.
Sorry, I didn't realise my mic was on, sorry. I'm glad I didn't say anything off it now. Councillor Hussey's right, the same should apply. The reason that I didn't bring it up is because unlike the incident that Councillor Alderman Hussey's talking about, I don't claim council expenses, therefore I wouldn't be putting them in. Therefore, for me, it's not a problem. So the report clearly outlines that mileage will be covered for people attending. And if people want to claim that, it's up to them. Personally, I don't, so it's not an issue for me personally.
Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, on the same vein, I was unsure where Alderman Hussey was going with it, but as far as I know, that none of our team would claim expenses for attending a meeting. Yeah.
Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to say, look, I appreciate that Alderman Hussey participated in the earlier discussion with Professor Boyle, and I think his comments were insightful and useful, even if we disagreed. But I'm glad he was part of that discussion, to be honest, because that's what we want to have. And in terms of this event, yeah, look, People Before Profit will be supportive. I'll be attending. I won't be claiming any mileage money to go to it, and I would encourage all members not to attend on their own, without council resources being put to it. So I'm glad Councillor Alderman Hussey raised that as well.
Chair, I have no objection to people, they're representing an official group on council. I have no objection to them claiming whether they do or do not. But it's the actual principle then that goes beyond into other representations of council.
Okay, so we have the recommendation there for, sorry, I'm just bringing it up again here. Is there anybody going against this, or are we okay to move forward? Yep, okay. Okay, so the next items are open for information. Is there anybody that wants to come in on a particular agenda item? No, just checking online here too. No, okay. We'll just move on then. There is some correspondence on page 205 to 208. Does anybody want to come in on that? No, okay, shouldn't watch. That's us finished. Thank you very much. Sure. You away?